We've been studying characters in the Bible, and this evening I want to look at Barnabas. Barnabas means son of encouragement, and Barnabas was an encourager. And we all need encouragers in our life. There's 2 or 3 people I can think of in my life that are very encouraging to me, and I think that that's a real trait. That's actually I believe it's really a gift from God to be an encouraging person, because Lord knows, there's a lot of discouraging people in the world, right? And there's a lot of people that say it can't happen, or you can't do it, or it can't be done. But it's nice to have people in your life that are encouraging and uplifting, and those positive people within your life. And so I think that Barnabas was one of those guys. He was from the island of Cyprus, interestingly enough, and so that made a little bit of a difference in his life. He wasn't traditionally what we would think from Judea or from that area. He was from the island of Cyprus, and Paul visited that island, and so he had contact with Paul from that idea. He there we go. In Acts chapter 4 and verse 36 is probably one of the very first ideas or glimpses we get of Barnabas. And in Acts chapter 4, I don't have my usual Bible here, and this one's a little bit smaller print. So I go, whoa. So in Acts chapter 4, verse 36, Joseph, a Levite and a Cypriot by birth, the one the apostles called Barnabas, which is translated son of encouragement, sold a field he owned and brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet. So, that's one of the first times we hear about him, is that he did that. And that's kind of interesting because he was a Levite. And by the law, Levites didn't own land. But apparently in this case, he was from this island. He did. He took that money, he laid it at the apostles' feet. That's what led to the story of Ananias and Sapphira. But he donated that money to those apostles in order for them to use that. And that was happening. It was very communal, and they would sell their land, sell their possessions. They were giving it to the apostles, giving it, distributing to those who had need. And that's really the first we hear of him. He was that guy, that kind of a guy. He was giving, he was encouraging, and I think he kind of fit his name. He was John Mark's cousin. So that gives him some relation in that, and that'll also tie him more into Paul, because John Mark will go with Paul on Paul's first missionary journey, and of course that's going to fall apart. So, he's the one who goes and gets Paul, right? Barnabas is the one who goes and gets him. Paul's been gone. There's a period of span of time in there between Paul's conversion and the time that Barnabas went to get him that we don't know much really about what Paul did. There's a period of years in there that Paul was kind of out of duty, out of active duty. I mean, he was working, doing his thing, but before he really came on our scene, there was a period of time because they didn't trust him. The Jews didn't trust him. The Gentiles didn't trust him. And so he kind of fell off the map for a while. But Barnabas is the one who's going to go and going to get him and going to bring him back, because Barnabas knows that Paul is, we don't know if God told Barnabas to go do that or not, but I guess he knew that he needed to go get Paul. He needed to bring him back to him. When he arrived in Jerusalem, Paul, he tried to associate with the disciples, but they were all afraid of him, since they did not believe he was a disciple. Barnabas, however, took him and brought him to the apostles, and he explained to them how Saul had seen the Lord on the road, and that he had talked to him, and how in Damascus he had spoken boldly in the name of Jesus. Saul was coming and going with them in Jerusalem, speaking boldly in the name of the Lord. He conversed and debated with the Hellenistic Jews, but they attempted to kill him. So, and then when the brothers found out, they took him down to Caesarea and sent him off to Tarsus. So this is the time that Paul was there, and Barnabas is the one who took him and brought him and explained that he's a good guy. He's the one that stepped up in Paul's defense, but Paul's going to be sent off. But then when we get to the church in Antioch, after this period of time that Paul's gone, then Barnabas once again is going to go, and he's going to get Paul, but at this time he's at this Gentile church in the Antioch church, and he's encouraging the people there, and then he's going to go, he's going to go and bring him back. In Acts chapter 11, verse 27, I don't have this all laid out for you tonight, and the reason is because we had a kids' Christmas party this afternoon. In those days, some prophets came down from Jerusalem to Antioch, and one of them, Agabus, stood up and produced by spirit there would be a severe famine throughout the Roman world. So, the first mention of prophets is in Acts 11 and 27, and then Barnabas is labeled as a prophet in Acts 13:1 when it talks about the prophets there. So that's something that he had, a gift that he had. So Barnabas has become very useful. In Antioch, there were prophets and teachers: Barnabas, Simon, who is called Niger, Lucius, and Cyrenian. So Barnabas is mentioned in that in the church in Antioch in Acts chapter 13. And so it's there that he's really going to get involved with Paul, because Paul is going to use Antioch as a basis for his missionary journeys. And, of course, on his first missionary journey, he's going to take John Mark with him, but, of course, that's going to fall apart, and then eventually Barnabas is going to go with him. He's active in this. We see this again in the church in Acts 13:7. He was with the proconsul, an intelligent man. This man summoned Barnabas and Saul and desired to hear God's message. And it's interesting in that verse that Barnabas is mentioned first, not Paul. Barnabas and Paul, and wanted to hear God's message. So, at this point, you see Barnabas is growing. He's not only started in the church of Jerusalem, he's carried this through. He's been involved with Paul. He's been involved with the church in Antioch. He's labeled as one of the prophets there. He's summoned to teach. In Acts chapter 13 and 42, they want him to teach more. So he has a ability to do that and a gift for that. And that's going, as they were leaving, the people begged that these matters be presented to the following Sabbath. After the synagogues had been dismissed, many of the Jews and devout proselytes followed Paul and Barnabas, who were speaking with them and persuading them to continue in the grace of God. So Barnabas is not only an encourager, he's also a teacher. And it seems that people like to hear him. And I think there's a great lesson in that for us and the way that he carried himself in the church. And not only was he that, he was a leader in the church. He was selected to go to Paul with Jerusalem in the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15:2. So he was not only that, but he was one of those selected to go. So he manifested himself as a leader, as a teacher, mentioned as a prophet, companion of Paul. He was a guy that was involved in a lot of different things and very active, and selected to go back to Antioch in Acts 15:22 at the end of Jerusalem Council. He was the one who's going to carry that message back, trusted to carry it back. So he's one of those guys that was active, that was willing, that was seen to be a very capable person. I think he's one of those guys you'd want with you if you were ever to go do something like that. I've always said with James, if I was ever in a sinking boat, I'd want James. Because James is the guy that says, faith without works is dead. So I figured James would pray and bail at the same time, which that's the kind of guy you want if your ship's sinking. And I always figured Barnabas would be the other guy you'd want in there, right? Because he'd be the one that was encouraging you to keep going. Paul had a rough life. Paul was beaten. He was imprisoned. He went on these missionary journeys. He was stoned. He was left for dead. Paul needed a Barnabas. Right? I mean, everybody's got a purpose in this life, I think. And Paul needed a Barnabas. He needed that guy that was going to say, you can do this. Keep going. It's going to be all right. You can make it through this. That's what an encourager does. That's what Barnabas did. And many times we look at these characters of the Bible and we think, and I hope as we go through these, you find somebody in here that you can relate to. Somebody that you're like, yeah, I'm that guy. I mean, if you think about Andrew, Andrew was kind of important, but in a way he wasn't really mentioned much. But Andrew did three things, right? He brought people to Christ 3 times. He brought Peter to Christ. He brought, the Jews to Christ, and he brought the Greeks to Christ. He brought 3 different groups of people to Christ. And that alone was his gift. That was the thing that he did that he's remembered for. It wasn't some great thing necessarily that you might think was a great thing, but it was. I mean, if he hadn't brought Peter to Jesus, then maybe we wouldn't have had a Peter. I don't know. The truth of it is that, Paul talks about that in Romans 12, doesn't he? He says we've all got these gifts, and we need to be good at whatever our gift is. And if you look at that list, they're not all these great, huge things that you think about. They're not these necessarily these huge deals, but they're things that all of us, in a sense, possess, aren't they? You know, it says uh, in Romans 12, and if you listen to this list a little bit, and you kind of think about Barnabas a little bit, it says, show family affection to one another with brotherly love. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not lack diligence. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in affliction. Be persistent in prayer. Share with the saints in their needs. Pursue hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Be in agreement with one another. Do not be proud. Instead, associate with the humble. Do not be wise in your own estimation. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Try to do what is honorable in everyone's eyes. If possible, on your part, live at peace with everyone. Friends, do not avenge yourselves. Instead, leave room for wrath. For it is written, vengeance belongs to the Lord. I will repay, says the Lord. You know, that's what God wants out of us. And sometimes we forget that. We think it's all great, big, huge things and monuments built to our names. But that's not true. You know, Paul says at the beginning of this in Romans 12, he says what? He says, of service and serving, if teaching and teaching, if exhorting and exhortation. You see, Barnabas was an exhorter. He was an encourager. If that's who you are, then you need to be good at it. Giving with generosity, leading with diligence, showing mercy with cheerfulness. You know, I don't know what your gift is, but encouraging is a huge gift. Encouraging people to be to worship, encouraging people to try new things, encouraging people to try different ministries, encouraging people to live up to their potential in the Lord. That's a really, really big thing, isn't it? It's nice to meet people in your life that have that smile on their face and that attitude in their heart and that go-get-it attitude. You know, my mother has always been kind of one of them people. It used to it gets a little irritating sometimes to me. She's a little too much that way sometimes. But she's always been one of those people that whatever you do, whatever she finds to do, whatever you do, she's all in, right? She's one of them people that's all in. And she encourages you to be all in as well. Um, you know, Barnabas, historically, we don't know a lot about him. A little bit that I'll share with you, but not a tremendous amount. In Acts 15, 35 through 39, seriously, got to get a bigger Bible up here. After spending some time there, they were sent back at peace by the brothers and those who had sent them. But Paul and Barnabas, along with many others, remained in Antioch, teaching and proclaiming the message of the Lord. After some time had passed, Paul said to Barnabas, let's go back and visit the brothers in every town where we have preached the message of the Lord and see how they are doing. Barnabas wanted to take along John Mark, and that was that dissension because Paul had taken John Mark and Barnabas on the first missionary trip, and John Mark had left and went back. And so Paul didn't want to take him with him. Paul didn't think he could trust him. But Paul did not think it appropriate to take along this man who had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not gone on with them to the work. There was such a sharp disagreement that they parted company. And Barnabas took Mark with him and sailed off to Cyprus. Then Paul chose Silas and departed after being commended to the grace of the Lord by the brothers. He traveled to Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. So when Barnabas separated from Paul, because Luke mostly stayed with Paul in Paul's journeys, we kind of lost track then of what exactly Barnabas did from then on out. But he is mentioned with Paul, 1 Corinthians 9:6. He joined back up with Paul. Paul was reconciled to John Mark. We saw that in 2 Timothy, where Paul says Mark was useful to him, and once again, they were together, and this was all worked out, and everybody was good together, and Paul used Barnabas later in his ministry. Barnabas continued to stay active and continued to do what Barnabas did. He continued to help and encourage the church. He is mentioned, Paul mentioned in Galatians 2:13, when he says, I stood to Peter and condemned him face to face because he was associating with the Jews, and he included Barnabas in that condemnation. So, in a way, he was kind of led back into that a little bit by Peter, and Paul kind of stood up and stood up and opposed Peter face to face about that. So there was a little bit of contention there. Traditionally, we don't know much about him past that. Tertullian, who was a Christian author, very prolific Christian author, but later on, not first century author, he named Barnabas as the author of Hebrews, interestingly enough, which most scholars don't really think that Barnabas wrote Hebrews, but he did mention that. So that's one thing we know. We don't know much about his death. Some tradition states he was stoned. One tradition says that a rope was tied around his neck and he was drugged to a place and that he was stoned. According to the history of the Cyprus church, in 478, Barnabas appeared in a dream to the Archbishop of Constantinople and revealed to him the place of his sepulture beneath a carob tree. The following day, Anthimus found the tomb, and inside it the remains of Barnabas with a manuscript of Matthew's Gospel on his breast. I thought that was kind of an interesting little tidbit. I don't know if it's true or not, but kind of an interesting tidbit about his death. So we don't know much about him. After he left Paul, we know a little bit later on, just mention of his name, but we really don't know much about what he did, but we do know that he was an encourager his entire life, it appears. He was active, he was a worker, and I think those are things that we desire in people. But most of all, every time I think of Barnabas, there's two or three people's faces coming to my mind. I'm not going to tell you who they are, but that are Barnabases in my life. And I think if you don't have a Barnabas in your life, you need one. And if maybe you are Barnabas to somebody that's around you. And this week, I think it'd be neat because it's hard for me sometimes. Sometimes I'm that son of discouragement instead of the son of encouragement, I found, especially the last week or so. So I'm going to challenge myself and challenge you this week to be more like Barnabas. Be that person that's encouraging to your spouse and to your family and to people that's around you, to be an encouraging person and not to be a person that's always saying, oh, well, that's not going to work, or oh, well, that's never worked before. All those things we hear, right? I mean, you hear that every day. You hear those words every day. You can't do that, or, you've tried that before and it didn't work. Let's not be that person this week. Let's be that person that says, yeah, you can do that, right? Knock yourself out. You're going to do a great job. It's going to all work out just like you want it to work out. Life's going to be good. Things are going to go your way. I'm praying for you that everything goes just how you want it to go. Let's be that person this week instead of that person that says, oh, don't try that. You're surely going to fail. Let's be the person that says, I'm going to pray about it. You're going to do great, and let's have a great week. Because don't you think we all need that in our lives? I think we do. I think that we all need encouragement in our life, and I think Barnabas was that guy. If we can help you in any way this evening, if you need the prayers of this church, or we can assist you in any way, won't you let it be known while we stand?